Right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. This is Open Forum. I'm Dr. Hunter. This is Dr. Mia. We are physicians at Coeur d'Alene Healing Arts. So I know a few of you are patients, some of you are community members. So this is a monthly gathering we do every first Wednesday of the month at 6:30. Different topics we kind of bring to the discussion, but also an opportunity to be openly dialoguing about health, answering questions, any and all related to health. So it's kind of a really great connecting point to dialogue, and I really do see this opportunity as a dialogue. It's conversation, so raise your hand, ask questions, share in anything you want to learn more about that we're covering, so we can just kind of pivot off that in the moment. So you notice we've turned the video camera on. There's going to be a recording of this if you want to share it with anybody. It's going to be up on our website, cdahealingarts.com, and there's a lot of other information about our clinic on the website if you want to learn more about us. So tonight we're going to be talking about detoxification. We're going to be talking about the liver and health and disease. And we're going to be kind of introducing the upcoming Juice Detox program that will be hosted here later this month. So there'll be an opportunity to learn more about that. If interested, sign up for it, and hopefully join some of you guys later this month for that series. So I wanted to start, this is a little different today than usual in that we typically ask the audience participants if they have any questions and then wait till the end of the prepared section of the lecture to kind of go through those. But I want to kind of leave space at the end to just talk about the group class and then launch right from there. So are there any questions that anyone has that we may want to chat about tonight? Anything health related? Yeah.
Okay, I am expecting.
Yeah.
And I am borderline cholestasis, so my liver function is really high. And my midwife put me on a diet. It's basically the best diet, so beans, eggs, spinach, and turkey or chicken.
Okay.
My question is there anything else besides those foods that I can eat?
Yeah.
Impacts my liver.
Yeah, cholestasis. Is that a new thing for you that's arisen during pregnancy?
Yes, it just came up recently. I had it with my first, this is number 6, but I had it with my first at the end, and normally it only comes in your last trimester when the liver starts really getting taxed.
Yeah.
But it's really early.
Okay, yeah, all right.
I'm having trouble sleeping on that diet just because I feel like it's just not.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can chat with some ideas about that.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Yeah, what other questions? Yes.
I'm interested in learning more what to do about macular degeneration.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I have one other, which I don't know if I can say the name, which kind of might fit a little bit in with her first thing, primary sclerosing choline whatever.
Cholangitis.
Yeah, if that's treatable, especially after it gets really bad and you look like you need a liver transplant. Or if there's something you could do to get you through the next 3 years before you get your liver transplant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that one might be good to tackle more in the context of the liver component of the lecture, because it doesn't differentiate dramatically from other liver conditions, in my mind. But yeah, we can speak a little bit to that and see if Dr. Mia has any ideas. Great. Yeah, other questions? Doesn't have to be about the lecture again, it could be anything. Any other things people want to learn about tonight?
I have a curiosity.
Yeah, sure.
I recently heard about dirt eating, essentially.
Okay, yeah.
And so I was just reading a little bit about bentonite versus zeolites versus activated charcoal. I'm just curious what differences are between those.
Yeah.
Not that might fit right in with the detox, I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna write inorganic binders. We can talk about, a little bit about them. Sure.
And I think, what was it, EDTA also came up when I was looking into this.
Yeah, so those are, very different compounds. EDTA and zeolites, I would put in very different categories than bentonite and, soils and charcoal. Yeah, but I can mention those too, or we can talk about those a little bit. Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. What other questions? Any other health topics?
I hesitate a little just because I've spoken with you before, so I don't know if it's more just individualistic or what, but I noticed my skin, arms, stomach, legs, everything just very dry to the point like white. And just wondering options.
Yeah, dry skin is so broad in terms of what can cause that. But we could talk about just some of the most salient things that I might think of first, we might think of first. Yeah.
And by white, I mean like, chocolate kind of.
Okay,
That kind of white.
okay,
Yeah.
got it. Good. What else? Any other questions anyone else wants to ask? Okay. So Dr. Mia and I are going to kind of tag team the questions here and share a little bit. So let's kind of, I guess, maybe come back to the liver questions at the end and start with macular degeneration. All right, so Connie, your question there. For me, macular degeneration is a condition of oxidative damage in the eyes. So what it means is that there are substances in the body that are causing a destructive reaction, whether they're pro-oxidants, whether they're free radicals, whether they're too much glucose in the bloodstream. So it's a cumulatory process, and in reality it's going on all over the body, but specifically these damaging, destructive actions are happening in the eyes, and they cause visual disturbance over time as they progress. It can be treated with surgery when it's very advanced, but my experience working with macular degeneration, it's very holistic, of course, so we want to identify the causative forces leading to oxidative damage. Glucose being a real big deal for a lot of people, poor regulation of blood sugar, but general inflammatory status and what informs that, eating inflammatory foods, really, poor balance of macronutrients, often too much carbohydrate, processed food. So these kind of things can often play a very large role. That would be the most important place to address. And then what we can do is get really aggressive with antioxidants, things that reduce oxidative damage and actually can reverse some of that oxidative damage occurring through macular degeneration. I've seen some pretty good success with that. So using a compound I really like called iRenew, it's a professional formula, but it's just got all the antioxidants I really like, and there's a few herbs, there's a few vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin E, zinc, selenium, really like bilberry, there's some zeaxanthin, I always mess that up, but lutein, so a few of these real more eye-specific antioxidants. So that's usually a therapeutic that I'll employ if we're really trying to treat it. Yeah, is there anything you'd want to add, Dr. Mia?
Yeah, I think kind of looking at the whole picture of maybe different organ systems or metabolic processes that need support, and kind of addressing the whole picture of inflammation and what might be contributing to that process. And again, the glucose piece, and making sure that that's well regulated and balanced and getting support where it needs. So
Great.
yeah, just to
Thank you.
So
second
the
that.
glucose piece, would you recommend them like a ketogenic diet at all for that, or?
mean, it really depends on the severity, right, of a glucose issue and the individual. That's a pretty, advanced diet. So it could be a way to address glucose issues, certainly.
Two questions. What she was saying with the glucose issue, are you saying just an issue, or you mean diabetes only?
No, any sort of issue with glucose regulation,
Okay.
yeah.
And then, is there any relationship in your experience between macular degeneration and dry eye? Like if you have dry eyes, it increase your chance for macular degeneration? And or does what you do for macular degeneration help with dry eye at all?
I don't know that there's a real direct linkage with the two in my experience. I wouldn't per se create that attribution, although they could be. Dry eye I would probably address pretty differently with essential fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, hydration, and again, more systemic, like Dr. Mia was saying, is always important to be assessing.
Is there a glucose relationship with dry eye as well?
Not as direct of a link, if there is one, in my experience. Yeah, but I mean, certainly, oxidation and damage in the eye is never good for the membrane health of those tissues. Yeah. So. Okay. You want to mention some of the inorganic binders and kind of what your experiences are?
I guess it depends on what you're using it for. I guess with activated charcoal, those things are typically used to bind and move out toxins. So one of the things I think about is, in an acute poisoning, that using activated charcoal, say in that situation, to quickly bind and move something out of your system. More of in a toxin sense, if you're taking activated charcoal or an inorganic binder, something similar to that, you're really binding up a lot of things. So just adding it into, say, a daily regime where you're having, your meals and stuff, you're going to bind up those nutrients and stuff. So it depends on kind of what you're using it for. I don't know what more you have to speak to that, but.
Yeah, I mean, the only other situation I would typically use it that's just commonly arises is when there's infectious process in the intestinal system. So really good if you're knocking out yeast or parasites or something. Sometimes adjunctively using a binder can help kind of suck that up and carry it out the bowel. You don't absorb any of those things. So, it's not a nutrient that goes into your body. It's inabsorbable. Yeah, so those would be more applied places. Maybe during a detoxification program, maybe if you're dumping a lot of toxins, helping carry bile out. But I wouldn't typically use it.
Yeah, and with that, in terms of moving out toxins, that's something if you're using it for that purpose to take away from food.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Is that okay with it?
I'm just curious.
Awesome. Yeah. Dry skin, essential fatty acids, similar to dry eye, is really super important to be addressing and thinking about. Of course, a question arises, is someone absorbing their essential fatty acids? So we always want to put that linkage in there, which is, you can't just assume that, because you could be eating a lot of healthy fats and not absorbing them. Hydration I find so important for skin health on many levels. So good hydration is really key. Those would be the two most obvious initial things that would come to mind. We also have to remember that dry or thinning skin is a natural process of aging. So it's not abnormal to have that increase, but severity, intensity, that's all relative to the person. So those would just, beyond looking at the more systemic picture, the first things I would think about.
What sorts of things affect the absorption of the essential fatty acids?
Good bile acid output, good gallbladder liver function, the coordinated action of the neurological system in activating that function. Someone's in a state of stress, chronic stress, very inhibitory to those types of function. Or if the liver or gallbladder has been taxed or compromised, or if you don't have a gallbladder, all of those would be very,
determine how one, whether one is really absorbing? How did you know?
Yeah, well, a
Like
lot
you
of
said,
it's,
you're taking it, you're
yeah,
doing it.
a lot of it's gathered through clinical insight, looking at all the variables, but obviously a digestive history is very key. One of the more obvious signs is, seeing oily stool. I mean, that's severe fat malabsorption. You can do stool testing to identify fats in stool. Also for some people, this is not scientific, but more floaty stool is fat floats, so that could be a possible indicator too. Yeah.
So if it were floating, that would be a good sign or a bad sign?
No, it would be indicative that there might be more fat in the stool versus it being absorbed. That's not always true though, so you got to be a little careful with that.
Okay, I was just saying, I thought I had heard the opposite, that floating was supposed to be a good thing.
Yeah, it's not totally scientific, it's just something that, you can consider as part of the analysis. Yeah. Anything you wanted to add? Okay. Yeah. Cholestasis in pregnancy. So, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit more of a complex liver pathology. It's very specific to a situation happening with blood volume and necessary kind of metabolic actions from the liver. So I guess your direct question was, how can I align this dietarily? You're eating spinach, eggs, and chicken, you said?
Yes, and beets.
And beets?
Pretty much just that. I'm not supposed to do anything else. Maybe a little sweet potato, but it's really tough. I mean,
Yeah.
it's to sleep. Like going up, waking up in the middle of the night, eating a bunch of more protein or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Okay.
there's any other liver healthy foods that would tax my liver.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the biggest thing that, might be more taxing is just really complex, denser foods. It's interesting you've been recommended to eat a whole bunch of protein. I don't know what your labs show or anything like that. But definitely protein is more complex digestively. And I would almost be more inclined, I know you're supporting a pregnancy, but I would almost be more inclined to not emphasize protein so heavily. An egg is actually a pretty heavy fat too, kind of more dense on the liver. So yeah, and again, I'm just, my way of tackling it would be actually possibly incorporating live juices, for example. I think that could be of real value, lots of nutrient concentrate, carrots, celery, beet, and juice, maybe a little apple, cucumber, those would be really great things. Lemon, certainly very liver friendly. And I would be very interested in a lot of good fibrous vegetables and diverse. I mean, the fiber's not going to get absorbed, so you're going to just gain the nutrients from it. And I actually don't have a lot of issue with, good complex carbs either. Actually much easier for the liver to handle than a lot of proteins. So quinoa, steel-cut oats, wild rice, brown rice. My more limitation areas would be really heavy proteins and heavy fats. Those are going to be much more challenging for the liver to process. So yeah, so I wouldn't be doing lots of nuts and seeds. I wouldn't be doing pork and dairy, red meat. Probably those would be de-emphasized. But I don't actually see a real strong need for that kind of severity of restriction, unless there's stuff in the laboratory findings that suggest otherwise. And I would be kind of very interested in considering castor oil packs in this space to really actually bring motion to the liver and action and activity. It's not really castor oil packs. It's not really contraindicated in pregnancy, I don't believe. So in this case, it seems really fitting, and you could really use it locally with heat over the liver. There's also some really safe nutrients you could consider. We could talk about them in the lecture later that I think would be very safe with pregnancy. Yeah.
About this pregnancy liver problem. Since the liver works with the lungs, is it very, very good to go as much as possible hiking in the forest, getting a lot more oxygen?
Sure, yeah, of course, absolutely.
Would that help the liver?
Yeah, I think it would help a lot of things, for sure. Yeah, maybe not long walks, that's a lot of weight to carry off of your hips.
But still.
Yeah, of course, time in nature is amazing it's very tonifying, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about castor oil packs you were using?
I will, yeah, and I'll get into them too in the
Oh,
lecture.
okay,
We'll
that's fine.
Thanks, but I'll spend extra time on it. Yeah.
I have a little kind of a question about her, because she's saying that on that diet she can't sleep at night.
Right.
And I know you might not like this name, and I'm not sure that I understand it at all, but Ray Peat talks about having orange juice at night when you go to bed, so that you have a certain amount of sugars for your liver to function.
That's
so
right,
you don't wake up between that midnight, 3 o'clock, wonder hour.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what I was suggesting is, the addition of fruit and whole grains seemed to be, something that would really be of value in repleting the liver's glycogen stores and, keeping that blood sugar more level. And just nutrition, I mean, that's a lot of demand to be, bringing nutrition for 2 people. So if it's coming all off of protein, which actually you take as much energy to break down the protein as you get from it. It's kind of weird. So having a real protein-centric diet is kind of problematic for me in that setting, for what that's worth. Yeah, I don't know if I would per se recommend orange juice, but it's just a lot of people are sensitive to it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Anything you wanted to add?
In addition with the castor oil packs, I think the lemon water again is really lovely, as well as maybe addition of bitters before meals to kind of stimulate your natural kind of digestive process before you eat, and just kind of help encourage your body to do its own functions, and producing enzymes to break down your food is a nice kind of gentle way to encourage that also.
You want to put your bitters right on your tongue a few minutes before you eat.
And bitters, like Swedish bitters, is that okay?
Yeah, you can use Swedish bitters. Yeah, we use like medical formulas, but Swedish bitters the same thing basically. Yeah, so a few drops right on the tongue.
They make little sprays and stuff that I'm sure they carry as well.
Yeah, they have them here for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Connie, your other question about primary cholangitis, I'm going to cover that in the context of talking more about liver. Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Dr. Mia. Awesome. So we're going to, I do this twice a year where we talk about the detox, but I like to, spice it up with a little subtopic because, I don't want it to just be the same thing each time. So this time I chose to focus on the liver. It's a really important organ, and I wanted to just talk about it for a little bit. I've never lectured on it, and we all know what the liver is, but we don't necessarily know much about it. So I really think it's pretty incredible what it does for us. We certainly couldn't live without it. That's probably why we call it the liver, because it's very essential for life. I think I will start with kind of a zoomed out view and just kind of talking about, first of all, where is the liver? So it is in the right upper quadrant of the body. It sits kind of under the lower ribs, and it's kind of a triangular shaped organ. It's protected by the rib cage. So it's one of what we call the visceral organs, the metabolic organs. And it's maybe, something like 10 to 15 centimeters high by about 20, 25 centimeters wide. And like I said, it's kind of this triangular organ. It has 2 lobes to it, smaller one and a larger one, and it actually is a regenerative organ, so if some of it dies, it can be regenerated. It weighs maybe about 5 pounds in an average adult, so it's our heaviest organ. There's a lot going on in the liver. And actually, it's even a higher concentration of body weight in babies. It's something like 1/50th of our body weight as adults, but 1/18th as babies. So when we look at its physiology, what it does, it is a very multifaceted organ. It is responsible for a lot of functions in the body. So I think the first function I want to talk about around it has to do with its metabolic function. Interesting to know that when we consume food, when it absorbs into the bloodstream, technically what it does is it absorbs into these things called lacteals, which are lymphatic ducts, and that dumps into a venous system, which is, there's arteries in their veins. Veins are bringing things back toward the heart. But before any of the food that we eat really heads back to the heart, the vast majority of it goes right into the liver in what's called the portal vein. So the liver takes us an initial swipe at pretty much anything we eat orally, or we take in orally. And that turns out to be pretty important for a lot of different reasons, both with food and with drugs and medicines. So when all of those partially or completely broken down foodstuffs get into the liver, it's kind of the assembly factory of the body, really. Our macronutrients, our proteins, our fats, and our carbohydrates get essentially synthesized in the liver for the most part. So with fats, we essentially take those, what are usually triglycerides, broken down fats, and we package them and synthesize them into cholesterol, and we shuttle them out into the bloodstream. So that's where cholesterol is made, and cholesterol is what we make hormones from. So most of our hormones are also made in the liver. We also take the different components of fat and shuttle them into cells to become parts of membranes. We also take those fats to convert them into immune cells. That all is happening in the liver. And there's tons of scientific biochemical things I don't need to talk about, but all of those interconversion reactions for fat synthesis is mostly happening in the liver. And so you've talked about LDL, HDL, right? You guys maybe have heard these terms, triglycerides, when you talk to your doctor about your labs. Well, that action's all going on in the liver. So when they talk to you about, what you should eat, or about what has cholesterol and what has LDL and all that, it's very misleading because actually it's the liver that's mostly responsible for that process. So it's not the cholesterol in the eggs that creates cholesterol issues. It's how the liver is functioning in synthesizing where we really have to look at that process more in depth. So that's where about 90% of our cholesterol is made, is in the liver. Some of it is dietarily absorbed, of course. In terms of proteins, the liver is the place of protein metabolism. And of course, proteins are very important to the body immunologically. They are what constitute our muscles. They are what constitute many of our hormones and neurotransmitters and signaling pathways. So proteins have a very important synthetic role in many of the building block tissues of our body. And they are absorbed into the liver as amino acids. So they're little single units of nitrogen units. Nitrogen is a major component of protein. And they're packaged synthesized into complete proteins of all different types in the liver. The liver also synthesizes non-essential amino acids as well, which are ones that basically you can get from your diet, but the liver can also make. So there's a lot of activity in the creation of proteins. And if the body is really in need of glucose, it can actually break down some of those proteins into glucose. And there's a process for that. So really important in the immune sphere, in the blood sphere, in neurotransmitters, hormones, any sort of kind of building structures in the body, the liver has a huge role in that. In regards to carbohydrate, liver also, again, plays a big role. One of the biggest roles it plays in relation to carbohydrate is storage of short-term reserves of energy. So it's really important for the body to keep a really even blood glucose. We need it at a very balanced level to access the creation of energy. And so one of the ways the body maintains that is it has this short-term reserve in the liver called glycogen. So glycogen is this, basically the storage port that's very easy to access and turn into glucose. And the liver stores about 24 hours worth. So if you fast for 24 hours, your glucose isn't really going to be impacted at all until those glycogen stores really totally deplete. And then the body converts into ketogenesis, someone mentioned that, and there's a whole metabolic process that follows, which also involves the liver. But glycogen is a major storage product of glucose, but the liver also, can package out carbohydrates in different forms and send them out into the body. So again, major functionality in the liver in terms of metabolism of macronutrients. It's also a major place of synthesis for some really important blood constituents in kind of components of our body. So a lot of immune cells are built in the liver. So immunologically, liver health is quite important. Macrophages, dendritic cells, immunoglobulins can partially be synthesized in the liver. There's also a major role, as we talked about, hormonally, neurotransmitters. A lot of the cofactors and all that process happen in the liver. A lot of our clotting factors are built in the liver, so our blood's ability to stick together and coagulate is very liver dependent. So these are just a few of the many actions of the synthetic roles the liver plays. But there's more, so that's just the synthesis stuff. We have also in the liver an important component of digestion. So the liver makes something called bile, which is actually a combination of fat components that initially comes from the diet but is synthesized, and the breakdown products of red blood cells. So the liver is also where we degrade red blood cells that are no longer viable, that have come to the end of their life. They're culled by the spleen and sent to the liver, and what's a process called conjugated into bile. And so that bile serves a purpose of getting rid of the dead red blood cells. It also gets rid of detoxification processes, which we're going to talk about in a second. So it's a major eliminatory pathway for toxins. But it's really cool in that it serves as a dual role. Because once that bile gets moved from the liver and it gets stored in the gallbladder, it's this little tiny organ that sits under the liver. The gallbladder is mainly a holding tank for bile. And what's important about that is when you have a meal, the body has a lot of signaling pathways. Dr. Mia started by talking about stomach acid, but then stomach acid helps promote food being broken down and dumped into the small intestine. And when that happens, there are hormones like cholecystokinin, long-named hormone, that activates the dumping of bile into the small intestine. And so that's in kind of concert with the food coming in. And so what that bile does is it gives a way to carry out the toxins, because that goes with the fiber and the rest of the food into the colon and gets eliminated. But also there are emulsifying agents or fat substances, fat-like substances, that create soap bubbles around all of your fat-soluble vitamins and all of your dietary fats. So in order to absorb dietary fats and fat-soluble vitamins, you need that bile to bring it into the body. And that's why it's so critical that we have the gallbladder, because you want a nice burst of bile to fully capture those fats. You don't have a gallbladder, your bile's just dripping into your intestines all the time. And you're going to have difficulty with fat-soluble vitamins as well as fats, absorbing them into your bloodstream. Now, a lot of those bile salts are reconjugated and they come back into the liver, so they kind of recycle themselves. But that bile function is very important as, again, an absorption component of what the liver does. Lastly, I think in the very relevant function of the liver to our detoxification lecture is detoxification. That's actually, liver is the primary internal organ associated with detoxifying in the body. Detoxifying is removing toxins from the body. And so there's a lot of action going on in the liver to take toxins from all different sources and convert them into a non-toxic, non-harmful form, and then move them out of the bile or move them into the kidneys for elimination. And most toxins are fat soluble, they're not water soluble, so the kidneys can't just strain them. When they're fat soluble, the kidney can't work with them. Kidney is also a filtering organ, but in a different way. So all these primarily fat soluble toxins, whether they're drugs, whether they're environmental toxins, whether they're, inflammatory breakdown products of foods, whether they're just normal things like how the body breaks down hormones or how it breaks down red blood cells, right? This all is happening in the liver. That's where the detoxifying of either old physiological compounds that are needing to be, die and kind of be recycled are going to be addressed in these detox pathways, or external forces, whether it's food, drugs, like I said, that get into our body that the liver helps remove. And it's constantly doing this, all the time. So there's two phases to that. There's phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification pathways. Phase 1 is a lot about detoxifying the fat-soluble compounds and kind of converting them into a less harmful form. And a lot of the part of phase 2 has to do with deconjugating and making them water-soluble for many of them. So we don't need to get into the nuanced details of it unless we were science nerds. That's not important, but suffice to say that there's this process that the liver takes harmful, hostile compounds and converts them into non-harmful compounds, and then either through the kidneys or the bile, removes them from the body. So, and one important part about why it's so important to have a high fiber diet is if you don't have the fiber, you're not going to bind up those toxins that come out with the bile, and they can recirculate in the body. So the standard American processed food diet that's full of, starch and sugar and no fiber, it further aggravates that pattern because you're not eliminating toxins that the liver's trying to dump really very well. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So I feel like, one more thing about the detoxification is it turns out that the liver needs a lot of cofactors to support those detoxification pathways. So I want to mention, when we're talking about supporting liver health, some of the things specifically to support the detoxification pathways that are known as cofactors to liver function. So without these in adequate quantity, the detoxing action of the liver is either going to be slowed down or compromised. So, pause. Any questions so far about the physiology of the liver in health? How it works, what it does in our body, what are some of the main actions? Anything anyone wants to dive into more detail about or learn more about?
So is it like your whole colon that your whole intestine, large and small intestine that the liver is absorbing from?
Yeah, it would be primarily, the large intestine is actually not an absorptive organ. The small intestine is. That's where all of your absorption happens.
Like the first one or the second one?
Well, the small intestine. It's very long. It's like 15, 20 feet long. Or even more, 20, 25 feet long. It's very long. So, yeah, all of those lacteals and lymphatics and veins, most of them go to the liver. Correct. First.
Based on what you said, she needs some fiber.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the elimination of bile and toxins, I mean, that's why I was advocating a more, high caloric and fiber-friendly diet. Sure, yeah, makes sense.
When you do the detox, can you
harm the liver?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the only things that I exercise caution with in people doing the detox is with really serious liver pathologies. Because now the detox is very cleansing to the liver on the whole, but the liver also has to work hard during the detox because it's that detoxing organ. So if someone is really toxic,
How do you know that?
we have to be really thoughtful about how to detox the liver. Well, I'm thinking more like really active chronic Hep C, cirrhosis, like very advanced pathologies. I would want to be very careful about an individual before, or modify some elements to the detox if we were to do it. It's not that it's an absolute contraindication, but we want to be careful if there's more advanced liver pathologies. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't have a gallbladder, does that put more stress on the liver?
You know, I wouldn't per se think it puts more stress on it. That's hard to parse. I mean, what it does is it puts more stress on the process of digestion, and it perhaps creates a limitation to the absorption and utilization of a lot of nutrients that are really important to liver function, so indirectly. And perhaps there can be some compromise with how those toxins are carried out efficiently of the body because the bile is not getting bound up with a meal and fiber as efficiently. So indirectly, but I wouldn't say not having a gallbladder is really devastating to the liver as much as the more global impacts of digestion and fat malabsorption without having a gallbladder. Yeah, cool. All right, good. So then flipping gears, what can happen, what can go wrong with the liver? What can happen to it? What can compromise integrity of liver health? A lot of things can. Yeah.
Didn't you say you were going to say about what would support?
Yeah, once I talk more about what can go wrong, I'll talk about some treatments. Yeah. So the, the biggest, and I want to focus on the biggest thing, because there's littler things, but really the biggest thing has to do with steatosis of the liver, or fat infiltration of the liver. It's a condition primarily of modern society. It's also known as fatty liver disease, which is more common, is simplest common term for it. And it's kind of what the title says, right? That there's fat accumulating in the liver that is harming its functionality. It's limiting its efficiency, and it's causing an inflammatory process. So there's two types of fatty liver, generally speaking. There's alcoholic fatty liver, and there's non-alcoholic fatty liver. It's kind of a bad designation because, the two blend too. I mean, obviously, if you're not drinking alcohol, then we couldn't call it alcoholic fatty liver. But basically, that goes to, and everyone knows that, alcohol can have a toxic effect on the liver. Alcohol is a toxin. So doing a lot of alcohol, the detoxifying of alcohol is hard on the liver, and it's kind of a double whammy because basically alcohol is just sugar. So sugar ends up creating can cause a fatty accumulation in the liver. So it's a very, we think of alcohol as an anti-nutrient, or certainly things like liquor, wine might be a little different, but it actually robs your body of nutrients when you consume it. It's a very empty calorie. So, and there's few different ways to differentiate with lab findings those two types of fatty liver. But the vast majority of people that deal with fatty liver, it's more non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it has a lot to do with intake of carbohydrates, especially refined and processed carbohydrates. And it has to do a lot with obesity. So if someone is obese in their body, especially if the obesity is what's called central, right? So the more apple-shaped body where the accumulation of fat is here, there's a very decent likelihood that there's also fat or adipose infiltration for the liver. And you can actually monitor that through an ultrasound. and actually gauge if there's more than 15% fat infiltration. The other way to kind of get an idea for that is to look at liver enzymes, which are called ALT and AST. When they're elevated above 40, 50, I'm usually suspecting, if the clinical symptoms show up too, that there's a fatty liver, that we're needing to deal with, or as part of the issue going on. And that affects a lot of things, having a fatty liver. One of the major things it affects is metabolism of these macronutrients, especially carbohydrates. So there's a strong connection with fatty liver in prediabetes or insulin resistance. A strong connection with fatty liver in blood sugar dysregulation. So when you see a fatty liver picture, they're often unlikely to be experiencing pain over the liver. Sometimes that's the case, and that can be true. But oftentimes it's asymptomatic, and we'd have to go do some more formal testing. Or we can just make the assumption, if someone is obese, if they have blood sugar issues, if they have cholesterol issues, another very classic thing with fatty liver, that's very possibly a process going on. So any questions kind of about so far what fatty liver is? And
Just what did you say the test was to check the liver?
yeah, well, the simplest one is a very basic metabolic panel, comprehensive metabolic panel. And I like to look at the enzymes AST and ALT. I think it's aspartate aminotransferase and alanine aminotransferase. Don't need to know those words, just the abbreviated letters. And usually if they're above...
AST and ALP?
Yeah, ALT.
ALT.
Yeah, usually if they're above 30, I start to kind of raise a question mark. And if they're above 40, I'm definitely concerned. And again, like kind of in tandem with that, alcohol can certainly create a similar situation. And I would say of all things, the thing leading to the most fatty liver issue is refined carbohydrates or starches and sugars. And that's really kind of conceptually a little paradoxical, right? Because, you think, oh, well, I need to eat fats to make a fatty liver. No, actually, remember we said the liver is what's responsible for doing all the interconversions of nutrients. And so actually the worst culprit for fatty liver is fructose, because fructose bypasses a regulatory step. And when you take in a lot of fructose, the body dumps that into fat storage and creating fat specifically in the liver. So high fructose corn syrup, sugars, all these processed starches, a lot of fructose in them, really hard on the liver and very predisposing to fatty liver.
When you're saying fructose, you mean sugar?
It's a form of sugar. Yeah, it's a form of monosaccharide sugar. So there's glucose and there's fructose, galactose. Fructose particularly is one that bypasses a regulatory step that glucose has that really promotes dumping those fructose molecules into fat storage in the liver.
So are you saying fruit?
Some fruit has fructose in it, but fruit usually comes with less fructose and a lot of other healthy things. Fruit juices, different story. That's concentrated fructose. But I'm thinking more of sodas and candies and processed foods, what most Americans eat primarily. Mm-hmm.
Dried fruit?
Dried fruit's more concentrated. Just because, think of, eating like a dried prune, like you could eat a dozen dried prunes in a blink of an eye, but eating a dozen plums would probably take a while. So it's just, dried fruit concentrates things more, not as much as juice. But, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the biggest one in clinical practice that shows up for me is the fatty liver, and a lot of consequences to it. The real long-term consequences, if it persists, it can actually lead to tissue destruction in the liver, like long-term, like lifelong, and liver function can decrease. And then we get into more serious pathologies, like called hepatitis, which is acute higher inflammation in the liver, chronic hepatitis, and that's just, those liver enzymes are a good way to pick that up. and then eventually cirrhosis or scarring and death of liver cells. And cirrhosis, eventually can cause death because, liver function can diminish and deplete. There's, that's down the road for a lot of people, but it's possible. Yeah.
So what is it, hepatitis A, B, C, I don't know how much.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about hepatitis viruses in a sec. Yeah, because that's another condition for sure. So we could say like cirrhosis of the liver from alcoholism is just really advanced alcoholic fatty liver disease that's progressive cirrhosis, right? So you don't typically jump to cirrhosis. It's a very end stage destructive process in the liver, and many things can cause it, not just fatty liver, but also viruses. And so this is not as common to see, especially in modern days where we don't have blood transfusion issues, and we don't have, at least in our populace, certainly the populace I work with, needle sharing. So the hepatitis viruses, A through E, well, there's not really a D, so it's really A, B, and C that we're kind of worried about. A is foodborne and is primarily in third world countries. We basically see none of it here. But B and C are a little more common. B can also be sexually transmitted. That's much less likely with C. But hepatitis B is also quite rare. I've actually never treated a case of it, so don't have much experience with it. But what I do have experience with is hepatitis C. And so it's just, the virus we call hepatitis C because it causes inflammation of the liver. Hepatic means liver in the Latin term. So hepatitis C usually becomes a chronic infection. It's very rarely an acute infection. And that infective viral process primarily gets transmitted from needle sharing. So young folks have it a lot in the kind of opioid, heroin, intravenous recreational drug use, and that's where young people still get infected. But this is also a relic of when blood transfusions for older folks, when they weren't regulated, we weren't screening for hepatitis C, or intravenous drugs have been around for a long time, and people more in their youth did some of that, and it was much less knowledgeable about this hepatitis virus. And so some people I treat, have positive testing for hepatitis C. And there's some other weird ways you get it, like needle sticks, but those are the primary forms of getting it. And basically that virus can cause some tissue destruction in the liver, especially over the course of a lifetime. And especially if you're not taking care of your health more broadly, it only amplifies the likelihood that that virus will really act up in the liver and eventually lead to cirrhosis or destruction of the liver cells and eventual shutdown. So some people do die of hepatitis C. It's rare, but that is a condition that does show up with the liver.
Now, the Hep C, is that reversible today?
It is treatable, and there actually is some drugs out that are new that are basically bringing people's viral loads to zero. Obviously, I don't work with those drugs as a naturopathic physician, but I don't have a huge opposition to them. They're kind of new. So any new drug, I'm a little leery of just universally endorsing because we haven't done long-term studies. Maybe the viral loads go down, but are there other side effects? Are there other organ systems compromised? I mean, preliminarily, I've had some, adverse effect feedback from some patients. So I don't really know.
I had a brother that died from Hep C.
Yeah.
He contracted it in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Got a tattoo over there.
Yep, tattoo, sure. Yeah, dirty needle, yep. So yeah, I mean, there are these drugs now that are very expensive, but potentially remove the viral load for some people. I would say in terms of liver conditions, we can look at a few other things that have I think more to do with like the digestive process, and like we can look at how liver can be harmed by a blocked bile duct, which is the duct that drains bile into the digestive system. That can cause liver backup. We can talk about toxicity from drugs. Tylenol is incredibly liver toxic. A lot of drugs are very liver toxic. So we can really harm our liver with, drug use, prescription drug use for other purposes. Really basic stuff like, ibuprofen, kind of hard on the liver, aspirin, hard on the liver. So basically any drug you take, your liver's got to detoxify it, and there's a cost to that, So really something to be thoughtful of when we're saying, drugs are good for this one thing. Well, yeah, but they're kind of hard on these other parts of your body, one of them being the liver. So that's something to mention. Another more rare condition is that primary cholangitis. That does have to do more with the gallbladder is involved in that process too. And it's not something I've treated a lot, so I don't have a really good working knowledge of it. But my understanding is very much that I would treat it like any other degenerative liver pathology. And I would be working on creating good bile flow, really repairing and regenerative liver hepatocytes, which are the cells of the liver, using a host of nutrients and supportive measures, as well as clinical nutrition, dietary emphasis as to how to treat that condition most adequately from a naturopathic perspective. So it wouldn't differ tremendously from, cirrhosis or fatty liver in terms of the modalities I would employ. So I'll just cover that in more broad context with the other liver stuff. I also just want to, make passing mention, but a significant mention to, the kind of primary emotion that often can be connected to the liver, which is anger. And I do see this clinically to be very relevant in certain points when there's liver pathology, that stuck anger can be very contributory there. I won't go into a lot of detail about how we connect with that and dialogue about that and work through that with people, but I can say that there are cases where working on getting anger unstuck and released has had really powerful transformative effects on liver dysfunction and healing that can happen there. Just a little aside. Okay, so questions about liver conditions. Anybody? The big things to look at,
If you find out if you have a liver backup or cholangitis, or
yeah.
how do you
Well,
find out?
well, there's some other tests. Yep, that's good. I'm glad I should mention that. Some other ways to look at the liver besides physical exam and like palpation and looking for tenderness, looking for liver size if it's enlarged, swelling of the liver. I mean, you can actually palpate for that and assess that. But there's some really decent blood tests you can do. So it's not just the liver enzymes that I mentioned earlier. You can also really assess some of the constituents of the liver, like albumin and globulin. Those are some of the proteins the liver makes. So if the function's really decreasing in the liver, those numbers can drop down. You also measure bilirubin. Is a very common test for liver function, and that has a lot to do too with kind of how the gallbladder's doing. So that can be measured, and when it's elevated, it can be looking at liver gallbladder blockage, inflammation, those kind of things. In really advanced liver issues, you can have things like jaundice, where the liver is shutting down so much that it's not able to detoxify the red blood cells and people turn yellow. If the liver is shutting down also and the gallbladder is not working, pale stool, our poop is brown, but if there's no bile going into the intestinal system, then poop can look like clay. because that's what turns it brown. Those are very more advanced signs of liver dysfunction. You can also get itching on the skin, because if the liver's not detoxifying, the toxins have to leave the body somehow, and the body will start pushing it out through the skin. So that action of itching can be a real advanced sign of liver dysfunction. So there's some clinical symptoms, there's some laboratory tests we can do. Unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't show up as problematic until things are pretty advanced. So I really like the liver enzymes as being our most sensitive. And there's another liver enzyme I didn't mention called alkaline phosphatase. That's interesting because you can subgroup them, and you can find issues with bone turnover there too, in kidney health and heart health. But one of the subsets of alkaline phosphatase has to do with liver health. Those are some testing methods. Okay, other questions?
Are there certain symptoms that are typically liver versus other things?
That's hard to say. I think the jaundice that I talked about, the yellowing of the skin, is pretty classic liver.
I meant the regular versus like really bad, but you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's not a lot of like dead giveaway there's a liver pathology beyond the ones that I shared if we're looking at clinical symptoms.
Yeah.
Many symptoms can be associated with liver dysfunction or not optimal liver function. And those are many of the conditions I already kind of spoke of that are not directly liver conditions. So metabolic issues, issues of toxic accumulation. I mean, we could looking at a sluggish liver function. And that's partly why we do these detoxes, because we can really, clean house and, take some of the weight off of the liver. Even though during the detox we might be leaning on it a little heavier because we're getting rid of toxins from the body. Yeah. So now, what I do to treat liver dysfunction, I mean, with the fatty liver, the main answer is somewhat obvious, but it's weight loss, right? Obesity and fatty liver, it's the main correlation. So we work together on understanding what has caused obesity, sedentariness, lack of exercise, dietary intake, nature of dietary intake, the real specifics of what that looks like. And we have to deal with all of the kind of tentacles that are associated with those patterns, if they're emotional patterns or stress or whatever. So we want to really work on that, and that's very necessary to ease the burden on the liver. Certainly, there are things really crucial and fundamental, like if the liver is the first organ hit by the foods we eat, and we're eating really inflammatory foods, it's certainly going to have a very compromising action on the liver. So I like to identify food intolerances. I like to understand what people are reacting to. And in concert with that, I like to understand what is the condition of the intestinal system. So if there's a lot of inflammation going on in the gut, that inflammation is going to be passed right on to the liver, first and foremost, as an organ associated with the gut. So leaky gut and inflammation and poor absorptive capacity, all those things are very significant to tonifying liver health. And I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics there. There's many lectures I've, video recorded on gut health and, really good adjunctives to that conversation. Food intolerances, etc. I've spoken a lot on those topics. So when we get then to just the liver itself, and obviously, again, real basic, like removing obstacles to cure, I guess, right? And we'll talk more about that in detox. Like if you're taking a drug that's liver toxic, then yeah, it's going to be a big issue for trying to heal a liver. So all of those environmental things that impact the liver that we choose to put in our body, or don't get to choose, which just come into our body, those are significant. Once we start working on the liver itself, and we've addressed the lifestyle stuff, we're not, eating too many carbohydrates and all the insulin resistance, and we've then we can really look at what constituents, compounds will actively support liver function. And we can look at that from the side of synthesis, but I think more appropriately and more salient to this discussion is in relation to liver detoxification. So there's some really basic compounds that really support that process. We call them cofactors. B vitamins are a big cofactor for that process of liver detox. The mineral selenium is a big cofactor for detox, as is magnesium. The vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E, to a degree vitamin D, and all the B vitamins play major roles in liver detoxification. Two nutrient compounds I really like, N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, you know, it's easy to see at the supplement stores, NAC, really good for liver health. It's a precursor to glutathione, which is the main liver detox pathway. Love using NAC. Alpha-lipoic acid is another one we can think about that's really good as a cofactor there. So these are a few of, you know, what realistically are many nutrients. We can also go into the food realm. Someone already mentioned beets. Beets great for the liver. So is lemon for the liver. So is garlic. To a degree, all fibrous veggies have a lot of great nutrients that support liver health. So those would be really good things to emphasize if we're working on the liver. And then we have the whole world of botanicals, of botanical medicine. So people have heard of milk thistle and milk thistle extracts, really great tonifying for the liver. Very safe in all forms, even in pregnancy. I would never have trouble using milk thistle. Turmeric and medical grade extracts of turmeric, really great for the liver. Dandelion, dandelion tea, dandelion root specifically for the liver. Burdock root, really good for the liver. I think those are some of my biggies. Those are some of my leading herbs that I would focus on. These can be taken in tinctures. They can be taken in standardized capsules. They can be taken as teas. All good options for liver support. So if we were to go beyond the kind of nutrients and herbs, then I would also be really thoughtful about supporting proper bile elimination, right? Because that's the last part of detox for the liver. So I really like beetroot extracts. I sometimes will use ox bile. I use a compound I really like called beta-TCP. It also has some of the bile salts in it. I especially use that for people without a gallbladder or people with sludge in their gallbladder. So that's a really great compound that I love. Lecithin can really help that gallbladder bile function as well. You can get lecithin in granules or liquids. So those are some things I think about nutrient-wise in terms of really being supportive of the liver. And it depends on the pathology and how advanced something is, how aggressive we need to be with some of those. I have a compound that I really like that's very multiple in some of the inputs, and it's called Live-It2. It's made by a company called Ayush, and that's a great one for more serious liver pathologies. And then another set of medicines that I'll use often is homeopathic medicine. There's some very strong homeopathics with a big liver affinity. Arsenicum, Nux vomica, Lycopodium. These are big liver-centered remedies, can often be very helpful. And then there's actually nosodes for the liver made of actually like hepatitis virus. So we can use those too. And those are homeopathic preparations. So another thing to consider, and again, usually I would do that individually with people in selecting which remedies are most appropriate. Okay. Any questions about those pieces? Yes?
This honey good instead of sugar, instead of taking sugar,
Honey is better, but it's still a refined sugar. You know, it just has better stuff in it.
raw honey?
Yeah, but it still has sugar. I mean, that's what honey is. So
We have liver, in Germany we say you should mix chestnut flour with honey.
yeah, I mean, small amounts of honey are not problematic. It's when large amounts are used that we can have the health consequences. Yeah, I like honey, especially wild, local stuff.
Yeah.
It's probably your best sweetener to use in very moderate, judicious
Yeah.
amounts.
Can you repeat the first homeopathic you said, Armin?
Arsenicum nux vom, yeah. So someone asked about castor oil packs. Love castor oil packs. It's a topical therapy we can do for the liver. And it's essentially the application of castor oil to the skin surface, usually with a flannel to hold it in place, that drives activity into the liver. It basically promotes circulation, it promotes lymphatic movement, and it promotes metabolic activity in the liver. So it basically activates the liver to work more efficiently. And it also works on the whole digestive tree in the same manner. So for liver and intestinal pathologies, I love using castor oil packs. And typically I ask people to use it for 1 to 2 hours, usually in the evening, and just kind of hang out and do some deep breathing or meditation or prayer or read a book, watch a TV show. And it's pretty powerful. You can actually feel it working on the liver, working on the digestive system.
Does it draw the toxins to the surface of the skin as well?
Not as much, a little bit, but primarily
mostly
it
to stir up the metabolic.
activates things and moves things, yeah. It's a powerful mover. I like to apply heat over it, even more therapeutic when we apply heat to the surface. So a rice pack, a hot rice pack or something. Yeah.
What sort
Together
of,
with the castor oil pack, you put then heat on top?
Yes,
Yes.
after the flannel that is saturated with castor oil.
Yeah.
what sort of mechanism, if everything you're eating is pretty much going towards your liver, how does putting castor oil on your skin have a greater impact than?
Well, I wouldn't compare the impacts, they're totally different, right? The castor oil is a mobilizer of lymphatic and circulatory action. The medicines you take internally more are cofactors in assisting the liver in its function. So it activates liver action through circulation and lymphatic movement. And it's a counter-irritant. So its penetration is through reflexive action in the deeper layers of the tissues as they interface with liver cells. So topically, you're not absorbing all that castor oil, but the castor oil is having an action internally via that counter-irritant mechanism, meaning it's communicating with the underlying tissues. Yeah, pretty good research around it too.
Interesting. Is that homeopathic?
No, it's very physiological. Yeah, very scientific. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I feel like that's a good kind of culminating point on liver. I want to make sure to leave space to talk about the detox, but I will mention that in the detox we do some very specific liver supportive work. We drink concentrated live juices, which is very supportive to the liver. We do some liver flushes with garlic and lemon, garlic, olive oil, and lemon to really activate the liver at the beginning of the detox. So there's some very specific therapeutics we apply to really supporting liver health while we work on the detox. Okay, so let's talk about detoxification. I want to make sure we understand the root of the word first, because we're doing this detox. What does that mean? Well, what's a toxin? It's anything that either we ingest or bring into our body, or our body that creates itself, that is harmful to function, that compromises, limits function. It can be a lot of things. It can be airborne things that we inhale, whether they're chemicals, whether they're smokes, fumes, industrial solvents, household solvents. It could be things we absorb through the skin. Again, similarly, any sort of, even like, receipt paper that has, BPA in it, which is it's a hormone, it's a hormone disrupting chemical. We touch things, we put our skin in things all the time that are toxin to the body, and this is some of the ways that toxins get in. The main way we get toxins into our body is we ingest them, we swallow them. And those toxins can be bound to our food, like pesticides and GMO residues, and heavy metals that come through our food. But really the biggest source of toxin creation is the consumption of foods that are harmful to the body in excess. Processed food, basically. Standard American diet. That's an immense source of toxicity. Okay, so it's what our body does with those foods when it gets inside that leads to toxic creation. Now, I also mentioned, we were talking about the liver, a lot of toxins are actually created by the body. You could say hormone breakdown is a toxin that the body has to remove. So that's a natural and healthy part of the body's process. The body actually creates toxins. We have this thing called the liver that helps remove them. When we're fighting infections, the body actually creates toxins to kill viruses and bacteria, and then we detoxify them, and we remove them, but that's a toxin. So when we make energy, we actually create free radicals that are toxins to the body. So all sorts of places where this happens naturally. But the accumulation of toxins, usually from external to ourselves, primarily through ingestion, is where we run into health issues. And so when toxins accumulate, then we can develop symptoms. And honestly, when I look at people's health on at least a very physical level, well, it's interesting because I didn't mention a big source of toxicity, but it's mental and emotional. It can be very toxic to the body and can literally create toxins. We can measure this when people are stressed or anxious. They actually create a lot of breakdown products of neurotransmitters that are toxic to the body. In the physical plane, I feel that the vast majority of symptoms that a person experiences can be linked to the accumulation of toxins in the body. So when you ask the question, do I have a toxic burden because I have these symptoms? Probably almost universally I'm going to say, yes, you do. Because that toxic accumulation is manifest in the body trying to regulate and adapt to those compounds that are inhibiting function, right? So whether it's fatigue or low immunity or allergies or gut symptoms or asthma or reproductive issues, menstrual cycle issues, headaches, irritability, poor sleep. I think at least in part, if not in total, all of those can be associated with the toxic burden in the body. And so, in knowing that, our question has to be, all right, well, how do we get rid of those toxins? That's what detoxification is about. The removal of those toxic substances from the body. But also, very important, the reduction of intake of toxins, right? So when we detox, we decrease the amount of toxins we're taking in, while hopefully ramping up the removal of toxins from the body. So it's like a very concentrated process to say, wow, we've dug ourselves into a hole, all these symptoms are showing up, seems like there's a pretty big toxic burden. Let's work on reducing our intake and amplifying our removal of toxins so we can bring greater function to the body and greater activity, vitality, efficiency to all of our tissues, basically. So I'm a big fan of this type of work because I think we can all benefit greatly from it, and it's very foundational It's very much addressing causative forces of what creates disease and pain and suffering. Okay. So, interestingly, there's many methods. Of course, you guys have probably all heard of online things, something your friend did a detox, did a cleanse, and it's really wide and variable how you can apply the principles of detoxification. In a very simple way, you could say, well, I'm going to stop eating potato chips. I eat potato chips every day. That would be a form of detoxification. I eat candy after dinner every day. I'm going to stop doing that. Okay, great. Well, you're reducing the intake of toxins into your body. So it's a mild form of detoxification. You could amplify that a little more and say, for a week, I'm only going to eat fruits and vegetables versus processed food and sugar and, poor quality proteins, whatever. That's a little more aggressive form of detoxification. You could take that an even deeper step and amplify the detoxification action by juice fasting. So by doing a fast where you actually don't take in anything solid, but you're taking in calories through vegetable juices and really helping eliminate toxins more efficiently. Then there's a real extreme form, or I shouldn't say extreme, but the most probably aggressive form of detoxification is water fasting, right? Is totally going on complete digestive rest, no caloric intake, only water, and that really ramps up the pace at which the body removes toxins. And one of the pieces of the logic to that is that the body stores toxins most powerfully in fat tissue. And we talked about most toxins being fat soluble. We talked about the liver. Well, most of our toxic burden is stored in our fat tissue. So when you water fast, you're taking in no calories, you're breaking down a lot of fat. And that means that your detoxing is amplified to a really high rate. So, that's something to be considerate of if you're thinking about water fasting. We'll talk more about it in a minute. There's another set of fasting, or I should say detox principles that I'm not a big fan of. And those are those pill powder detoxes many people have heard of. It's this idea that you buy all this stuff and you just follow this list and it's not real food, but it's a detox and you lose weight. Those are out there and they exist and probably not harmful to most people, but I don't find them to be nearly as effective as a food-derived detox protocol. And partly my kind of logical disagreement of it is that you're putting all these substances now that are not food into your body for your liver to deal with. We're already saying the liver has a lot to work on when you're doing a detox, so why overburden it further with all these colon tablets and this and that that are designed to help detox. So I'm not a big fan of those programs, and the one that we do is 100% food-based, with the option of doing a couple of supportive nutrients if desired. I really think we can do it very beautifully all from food. So the program that we do, we'll get more into it, but it's a combination of the whole fruits and vegetables exclusively with juice fasting. That's what we'll be doing in the 14-day class. So we'll get, and again, I'll talk more about it in a little bit. So fasting has a very deep history. Every major religion has contained within it principles of fasting, both for spiritual as well as physical health. When we look at the animal kingdom, it is a universal trait that when an animal is sick or injured, what do? They fast, right? Because it allows the body to reallocate resources to the addressing of the acute ailment, whether it's an injury or a sickness. Why do we lose our appetite when we get the flu? Body in its wisdom is saying, fast so that we can reallocate resources to this really big need and demand here. So it really permeates, and it permeates the traditions of medicine too. Some of the most ancient doctors were huge proponents of fasting. And in fact, our physiology is really well designed for this. Our ancestors would go through days, if not weeks, of complete food scarcity. So the human body is really well programmed and designed for engaging the process of fasting. And so it's really embedded literally in our DNA. Part of the reason we have such epidemic metabolic health issues like diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure is because we have, as a culture, become very accustomed to this. Really, it's a mental mindset that we need to eat 5-6 times a day. This is not true, and it's actually not very good for our health. So this class is an opportunity, or the concept of fasting is very beautiful in being able to reformulate relationship with food, and a really good opportunity for, deep cleaning different tissues in our body. So like I said, these traditions in medicine go very deep, and the precursors to naturopathic medicine incorporated detoxification very foundationally in fasting in their engagement of disease processes. And so my own personal connection to it is I had a very profound health transformative experience doing a version of the detox I'm going to be doing with this class. And it was profound just in the benefits I experienced with my health, and it made me really want to explore, as a physician in training, detoxification medicine. And I continue to use it pretty much every day in my practice, use principles derived from detoxification medicine. And I do detoxes all the time with patients individually. So I'm a huge fan of it. It's been very important in my own life, and I always participate with the groups because I derive such great benefit every time I use it too. So I think no matter where on the health spectrum you are, detoxification medicine can be very valuable. Okay. So I want to talk about some of the main principles of detoxification, right? So real foundationally, we have to see that, and this is core to naturopathic medicine too, is that we're founding this on a principle that intrinsically the body knows how to heal itself. So our job is to put the conditions in place for healing. And when those conditions are put in place, the body is going to use its intelligence and wisdom to resolve imbalance, dysfunction, and pathology and repair itself. So everything we're doing detoxification-wise is in alignment with that truth. So what follows from that is the second major principle, which is remove obstacles to cure. That kind of dovetails really nicely with that principle of when we detox, first and foremost, we reduce intake of toxins, right? So removing obstacles to cure is like, okay, you're smoking cigarettes, or you're drinking, a bottle of wine every night. I mean, right, these are obviously, you're eating a pound of sugar every day or drinking 4 sodas. So those are understandably, if you're doing that while you're trying to detox, it's going to be problematic. So a lot of the orientation of the foods selected in the detox is very much in this around this principle of remove obstacles to cure. And we're going to be very explicit about how that looks in the program, and not just with food, but with mental emotional toxins, certainly with stress-related and other physical toxins. We'll want to really appreciate that. Okay. We're going to do a lot of work with circulation and elimination. So remember I said the other important part of detoxification is amplifying the rate at which we remove toxins from the body. So how do we do that? Well, first and foremost, we increase circulation because our circulatory system, our lymphatics and our blood vessels are the highways of information in our body. So if that is stagnant or sluggish, no matter how much we're mobilizing toxins, we're not going to be able to get them to the organs of elimination. So exercise, sweating, contrast hydrotherapy, hot-cold therapy, massage therapy. These are really powerful adjunctives during a detox to be really regularly relying on to increase circulation. Okay, so now elimination, right? We got to look at, all right, we got these toxins mobilized, they're moving, how do we get them out of the body? So we have these primary organs of elimination. They're the bowels, they're the liver, they're the lungs, they're the kidneys, and they're the skin. Okay, so when we do the program, we'll spend a large amount of time discussing in depth the ways to amplify the actions of those eliminatory organs and make sure they're properly functioning. When I see people do detoxes online or from some other provider, this is the part where I see things really come up short, is that that individual has not really been very thoughtful about circulation and elimination and enhancing the quality of their detoxification process. So very important. This lecture too will spend a long time understanding those principles better. Okay. Questions around principles so far? Okay. So repair the GI system, that's the fourth principle. We've talked a lot about this kind of in relation to the liver, but I think of the gut as the seat of health. I mean, really, if we're not breaking down and absorbing nutrients well, there's going to be a lot of problems downstream to the rest of the tissues in our body. So gut dysfunction is pretty much pandemic in our culture because of how we eat and how we stress really hard on the gut. And we eat all the time, so we never give the gut a break. So doing a juice fast in the context of a detox protocol is probably the most medicinal thing I could think of for restoring and repairing gut integrity.
What is the most important?
Fasting. Yeah, juice fast. I said juice fasting, but fasting. It's probably, in my opinion, the most direct, efficient way to heal the gut for most people. Because it gives it a break. It doesn't have to keep working constantly. And we're bringing all these other really efficient nutrients in to repair that gut lining. There's a lot more to gut health, of course. There's the microbiome. There's all of the relationships that the bugs in our gut have to our health. I've talked a lot about the microbiome in other lectures, and really worth reviewing that. But, again, detoxification, very valuable to gut repair because the body can allocate resources to that process. So the fifth principle is the liver. We've covered that in detail today, so I'm actually not going to go to any more depth with it. But that's a really important concept of how we heal and support the liver to make a successful detoxification experience for someone. And then finally, transforming or detoxifying stress. So usually when we do this 2-week protocol, I really urge the intention to be set that this be a very self-compassionate process, where space is given to slow down a little bit and take time for ourselves and recognize sources of tension and attachment and strain that we'd like to release as we release other toxins. Could be incredibly valuable in this process. I had one detox that I didn't really feel like was nearly as beneficial for me, and I had a lot of stress going on at the time. And it really impacted the quality and depth of my experience with it. So we have to be mindful of those pieces. Okay. Questions about principles. Those are the 6 biggies that we're going to be covering in a lot of depth in our class. Okay, cool. So, benefits, right? I mean, what are you gonna, if you do a detox, what could you expect? Well, I mean, all the symptoms we talked about earlier, hopefully improvements of those, so better energy, better sleep, better digestion, less allergies, stronger immune system, better mood, weight loss, really, awesome part for a lot of people that they're like, yeah, I want to lose weight. Well, this is a great catalyst to start that. And it's the right kind of weight loss, which is good. It's not muscle, it's the actual visceral fat. I also love the benefit that in the reintroduction phase of the program, there's an opportunity to identify food sensitivities, which is so valuable long-term to us. So that's built into the kind of methodical approach that you can get much more clear about sensitivities. And again, the benefits are kind of unending. I don't really think that, I mentioned a few things, but I get such varied, wide feedback, positively about the, overall action of doing a detox for patients. Now, that doesn't always mean that when you're doing the detox, you feel like $1,000,000, right? You're dumping toxins. So, we have to navigate some of the symptoms of that and work through that. One of the, I think, advantages of doing that with the class and being a participant is you have my guidance and the dynamic and support of the class through that whole process. So, I give my cell phone number out to all the participants, and we, you're invited to connect with me as much as you need to make sure you feel supported in what you're experiencing going through the detox, whether they're questions or symptoms. And I've done this with, now, upwards of 1,000 people. So I've been doing it for 6 or 7 years, a couple times a year with groups. So, I've been able to glean some wisdom about how to more broadly share what to expect, but also how to kind of work through things that arise. So it's a guided process. It's an individualized process for each of you, even though we'll be following a general guidebook that gives us the broad structure of the program. I mentioned it is food-based, so there's no need to buy external medicinals. I'll have a few optional things we can utilize, but it's totally food-based, and Pilgrims is very generous in offering a little produce discount for the participants during the program. So there's I think 10% discount that you can apply for really good, healthy, organic vegetables and fruit. As I mentioned, it is a protocol that's been around a long time. I've adapted it somewhat significantly, but many, many thousands of people have done it. One of my mentors shared an iteration of it with me. It's got a pretty big track record. And it comes with a series of 4 classes. So the way that it's structured is that we are going to meet in a circle in here 4 different times: Thursday, Sunday, Thursday, Sunday. And the design of that is that we meet the day before initiating the next phase. So the first meeting is the day before the start, where we do phase 1 called the bulking phase. A lot of raw fruits and vegetables are lightly cooked. And there's a big education component about making sure everyone's comfortable with how that's going to look, as well as doing broader detox principles and lecturing. Then we meet the Sunday of that same week, 3 days later, which is the day before the juice fast begins. And we lecture a lot more. We talked about eliminatory and circulatory principles. That's a big focus. Digestive physiology. We get into a lot of detail about explaining and understanding that in a more helpful way. And we prepare for the juice fast. And then the following Thursday, we prepare for the reintroduction upcoming, which begins over the weekend. So we will go over food sensitivity testing, methodologies, the details of how the introduction will look. We'll talk about extending the fast if desired, and kind of get ready for that. And then the final class will be held on Sunday. So there's 2 Thursday and 2 Sunday classes. And that's been recently added to account for the fact that, well, first of all, you're not totally done that Thursday. You're really only halfway through at the second Thursday. So I wanted to connect more with the group, but also give people space to ask questions and apply some principles for how do we move forward beyond this. Because ideally, this detox is a reset or a catalyst for a healthier way of living. And I like to create some space to really open up into that with people in that class. And another big component of what we do is it's the collective energetic and physical support we give each other through going through a really, transformative process. It's so much more powerful when we can do it in group and we can share our experiences. So that's an important leading part of every class, is that we can use that time to connect. And I think what I'm most enthusiastic about doing it with the community, where we don't need to be a patient per se to do this class, is that you're going to get to take home a tool with you that you could actually use for the rest of your life. I mean, I do it twice a year, and it's incredibly important to me. I don't see any reason why anyone couldn't continue to use a tool like this. And so that kind of protocol is going to be provided in a guidebook. So we'll have notes to be going through, about a 50-page guidebook through the whole detox process. So we'll be writing notes and referring to that as we go. Now there's a couple of subsets of people that I don't think are the best candidates. Pregnancy and nursing is something that I think is something probably should be avoided to do detoxing, in this fashion at least. People with really severe liver pathologies I mentioned, and perhaps severe kidney pathologies. And if there's a cancer diagnosis, I always like to talk about that individually to see if it's appropriate for that person. There's a few caveats, but generally, and also young children, adolescents maybe, but young children, they need more calories to be growing, so generally not an appropriate candidate for it.
How about diabetes?
Diabetes is doable, we just need to know individually. And that's a good point, is that if you're not a patient of the clinic, I send a very comprehensive email about filling me in on your health history, so that I can really individualize things if necessary to your treatment during the detox. So again, like I mentioned, the individualizing part's very important to me. So you'll be receiving an email if you're a non-patient about sharing health information with me if necessary. And also all the class participants will get a 1 week ahead of time email on how to prepare, how to kind of get ready for that first phase of the program. So that if you're a little antsy about that, you can kind of know what to expect. So, the actual dates themselves are, they would be, let's see, April 25th, April 28th, so that's Thursday, Friday, and then May 2nd and May 5th. Sorry, Thursday, Saturday, and then May 2nd and May 5th, which is Thursday, Sunday. So Thursday, Sunday, Thursday, Sunday. And the times is going to be on Thursday night at 6:30 to 8, and on Sunday from 4 to 5:30. And I want to make a note of that because the Pilgrims kind of newsletter said the Sunday classes were at different times, but they're from 4 to 5:30. And we will be, we do have some little, I think, flyers in the back about this, so if, you don't need to write this all down per se. If you want to grab it, that's great too. But those will be the days that we do this. And we call it the class support series, and kind of the times. And if you can't make a class, we can accommodate for that. We would just need to know ahead of time, and I can maybe connect with you and go over the real important points if you have to miss one of the sessions. Ideally, you're there at all of them, but you don't have to be. I call this like more of a working class fast, in that you don't need to drop your daily obligations and duties. You don't need to stop going to work. So there should be no limitations. As I said, I just hope that it can be a time where you go a little more inward in your focus of self-care. Yeah,
You listed some exceptions. What about small bowel intestinal growth, overgrowth?
That wouldn't be a limitation in my mind. We would just need to adapt